This is Shaftesbury Avenue. No, not the Shaftesbury Avenue, the famous street in London, but this one does have a claim to fame that nobody seems to be able to agree on. The story is that it was a relief landing strip in the Second World War, a kind of satellite runway for RAF Ringway, which is now Manchester Airport. Today it's lined with bungalows and post-war semi-detached houses, and the road is flanked by two driveways that serve these properties. The bungalows were apparently built to make it easier for aircraft to land, but we'll come to that point later on. The straight section we're seeing here is exactly half a mile long, or just over 2,600 feet. Almost triple the space a Spitfire or something similar would need to land, and over quadruple the space it'd need to take off. So, in theory, it could have been used as a landing strip, but there are a few points we need to look at first. RAF Ringway had 3 runways, which was plenty enough. It was operational from 1939 until 1957, and from June 1940 it became the wartime base for No. 1 Parachute Training School of the RAF. This unit was charged with the initial training of all 60,000 Allied paratroopers trained in Europe, and for the development of parachute drops of equipment and the development of military gliding operations. No. 14 Ferry Pilot Pool of the Air Transport Auxiliary was also based at Ringway between 1940 and 1945. The veteran 88 aircrews delivered many thousands of military aircraft to operational units, which had been built, modified or repaired at Ringway, Woodford, Barton and other Northwest aircraft factories and airfields. Over 4,400 warplanes were built at Ringway by Fairey Aviation and Avro. What we've covered so far is really related to the airfield's use of big aircraft such as the Avro Lancaster, Hanley Page Halifax and Fairey Gannet. There was also the assembly of the Avro Lincoln and the production of over 100 Avro Yorks. Now, none of these aircraft would have been able to land on a relief strip at Shaftesbury Avenue due to its width. The driveways that flank it were always there and would have made the road too narrow. However, other aircraft built at Ringway included the Fairey Battle, the Fairey Fulmar, Fairey Barracuda and the Bristol Beaufighter. No. 613 City of Manchester Squadron also had its home at RAF Ringway during 1939 and again from 1946 to 1957 when it flew Supermarine Spitfires and de Havilland Vampire jet fighters in its fighter role as a unit within the Royal Auxiliary Air Force. So the Vampires came after the war, but Spitfires were there during, meaning that along with the Fairey Battle, Fulmar and Barracuda and the Bristol Beaufighters, there were plenty of aircraft using RAF Ringway that would have benefited from a relief site should the main airfield have been damaged by German bombers. The Germans did reach nearby Altrincham during a nighttime bombing raid. A parachute mine was dropped on a works area in Broadheath, hitting and totally destroying a sweet factory at the corner of Huxley Street and Wright Street. The blast at 8:50 p.m. on October the 25th, 1941 killed 8 people, seriously injured 17 and caused minor injuries to another 26. Other bombs damaged 10 other factories as well as St Albans Church School on Sunderland Road and some shops. 9 houses were totally destroyed, 14 so badly damaged they had to be demolished and 655 others sustained some damage. So we've established so far that the threat to RAF Ringway was real and the site was important and would have benefited from a relief landing strip. But here's the question, why Shaftesbury Avenue? During this time there was an abundance of airfields within a few minutes flying time. There was the Avro factory at Woodford just 5 miles to the east which had adequate runways. There was also the Royal Naval Air Station at Stretton 10 miles to the west and Barton Aerodrome 9 miles to the north. Now these were pretty high profile airfields and the Nazis were definitely aware of them. In fact they had detailed aerial imagery of them. However, there was one suitable site just to the south, exactly the same distance from Ringway as Shaftesbury Avenue, and that was Tatton Park. Tatton Park was used as a military airfield and military training site during World War II. The airfield opened in 1940 and its role was a relief landing ground for RAF Ringway and as a satellite practice area for parachute training. It consisted of a grass landing area surrounded by trees with a single pre-war type wooden hangar. The airfield closed in 1946 after the war because it was no longer required. So with all this in mind, was Shaftesbury Avenue a relief landing site? Well, there isn't much or really any evidence to suggest this fact. I mentioned earlier that the bungalows were built to make it easier for landing aircraft, but they were built in the late 1940s and 1950s onwards, so that really debunks that point. There is one story out there on what it was used for, and that story is definitely military related. Not far away in Broadheath was the Churchill Machine Tool Company, who apparently made tanks. Rumour has it that Shaftesbury Avenue was used to store these tanks while they awaited transportation elsewhere. Now, I'm not sure I believe this story either. There was vast expanses of land much closer to Churchill's to store tanks, and I can't find any evidence to suggest that the place even built tanks. Let's say they did. Well, there was a vast network of railway sidings close to Churchill's onto which these tanks could have been distributed from. And as for Shaftesbury Avenue, the reality is that just before the war, the Department of Transport only granted permission to the local authorities to build or rather modernise Shaftesbury Avenue if they built 9-foot wide cycle paths either side. So was Shaftesbury Avenue built as a runway in World War II? I very much doubt it.